Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Chris Bobrowski and I'm the lead faculty for the electronic music program and soon to be music and technology program. And, and this is the Careers in Music and Technology lecture series. This is something we started as we started developing the music and technology program, and we've gotten some funding to bring 3 to 4 guests to campus every year to talk to you about careers in music and technology. You know, there are many career paths that are very straightforward. You do A, B, C, and you get to a place. Music and technology, from everyone we've heard from, and I think also with Kristin, it can be quite windy and all over the place. So we're really happy to be able to bring guests to talk about their individual paths that they've developed over time. So I'm very happy to have Kristin Miltner here with us today. She's a composer. She often programs her own musical systems for recorded and live performance. She's also a sound designer for educational toys and video games. Currently, she's very involved with immersive audio, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that. And also, she's very involved with the Bay Area electronic music community. In fact, we met through the San Francisco Electronic Music Festival board, where we were helping to organize that very grassroots festival in the Bay Area.
Suki and Kane, and
that's right.
Lots of cool people running that.
Yeah. So please welcome Kristin Miltner.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to jump in. I'll explain how I got started on all this. So we had this beat-up old piano in the basement. It was a gutted player piano. And I don't remember this, but my parents noticed I was playing the Sesame Street theme song on the piano when I was 4. So that's when I started. I started piano lessons when I was 4. I was a Suzuki kid. My mom is a retired grade school art teacher, and because of her, I love to paint and draw. And I felt like early on I just kind of discarded everything STEM oriented, because I remember I was like, I don't want to be an artist. I don't need calculus or whatever, any of that. I was just always very, very art language oriented and I didn't know why I was doing any math until I started to learn programming, because there was a reason to do it. Suddenly I started to learn how to program when I was looking at trying to get a certain look when I was building video and sound installations in college. So it really wasn't until I was at the Kansas City Art Institute where I was exposed to a real Mac computer lab and Pro Tools for sound editing for the first time. It was Director for Animations, Basic Stamps for Interaction. And I realized I needed some programming to support the kinds of sound installation art that I wanted to make. So I was taking classes in film and video. I went there for painting, so I thought I was going to be completely anti-tech almost about like my approach to art. And then I started I just got interested in film and video. I was seeing things like non-Doom-Pake, and wanting to do stuff like that and thinking, okay, I can reintroduce my music and sound sort of back into my visual art. So the Pro Tools rig was like OS 9 on an 8500, gray with the gray towers. And I fell in love with the process of building things with sound. And I was introduced to Pauline Oliveras' work and Musique Concrète and Alvin Lucier, and I loved all that stuff. So I was using a bunch of 4-track recorders and 10 or 12 speakers in a circle in a room, and I'd send like 1 track to each speaker, and then I cut like the decays out of like long piano notes and started stringing them together in Pro Tools to make these like long tones that had a lot of overtones and harmonics in them, and like sweeping through all the harmonics in those sound files and outputting them to tape, and then like sending one track on the tape recorder to each speaker in the room and putting them in a room. And by the time I graduated from art school, I wasn't doing much visual art at all. I was making sound art and writing programs that drew patterns on screens as a companion to the sound. So I moved to the Bay Area to attend Mills College in Oakland after graduating with a degree in new media. And I studied with Maggie Payne and Pauline Oliveras, who was my hero at the time and still is, at Mills. And now I'm on the San Francisco Tape Music Festival Curatorial Committee, along with Maggie Payne, and it's just nice to be working professionally with a mentor like that. So the Tape Music Collective is a group I've been involved in for a few years. The Tape Fest is a wing of SF Sound, Matt Engels' organization, that does all kinds of acoustic new music concerts as well. If you don't know his work, check it out, Matt Engels. He's a clarinetist and composer. He can do circular breathing like you wouldn't believe. Like these improvs that he does are just like, you would think they were electronic. They're just like, they bounce off the walls, they create different tones in your ears. They're just like, they're amazing. And so he works as a software engineer for ADIA. I don't know if anybody uses any like software instruments for composition around here, but ADIA puts out orchestral instruments and all kinds of things, and he works there. So the Tape Fest is a yearly festival of multi-channel music, diffused in the dark. This is the program that we put together. And it's usually a 16-channel system that's imported from Karma at Stanford, and we set it up. It's a QSC system, and we spatialize and diffuse all of these old works and new pieces. It's a festival of 4 different nights, usually in January, so check it out. Okay. So I've always been interested in the way sound influences our environment, our moods, and our states of mind. I love the process of programming audio behaviors as much as I love creating the pieces and layers of audio that I'm animating. I like to build spatialization patches in Max using SPAT from AirCam to control positions of sources. What you see on the left there is a sequencer and synthesizer that I built in Max, and on the right is another patch I built in Max that takes this is like the fundamental patch that I've been using for years and building on. It takes any audio source I give it, and it granularizes it, and then it sequences those grains pitch-wise and in time, and moves those around in a 3D physical space. Can attach that granular output to a source, and then move it around positionally in space. I currently use these patches to create multi-channel immersive music that's diffused live in a concert hall. And the bottom left picture is outside the Victoria. It's a little, I don't know if you can see that, but it's just a shot of the crowd at intermission. I use Max patches for installations too. I'll talk about what my company, Praemedia Labs, is doing with Above Below in a bit. I use it to build tools and proofs of concepts that help other sound designers on my team try things out. So yeah, as I evolved these Max patches and soundscapes in artistic venues over the years, game audio is a natural fit for me for the day job. So just because the same thing you're doing in a theater live, or live in a theater, you're often doing in a virtual space, assigning sources, moving them around, adding variations, building environments and sound. I've designed sound for platforms big and small. I've designed sound effects for some, composed music for others, handled dialogue, music, and sound effects for many of them. I wanted to highlight some of these games to give you an idea of the range of projects I worked on. I began at Leapfrog in 2002, creating audio for educational standalone devices, chunky plastic books with interactive paper, tons of clickable objects that make sound. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I've also designed card play UI sounds for PC desktop games like Wizards of the Coast, Magic the Gathering online, and the Pokemon trading card game online. So it's a lot of like, it's creature sounds, and also a lot of dealing and shuffling and discarding of cards. So you have to be really quick to the point, make these clean, modern sounding card sounds, because they're going to be played repeatedly on, in every game, every action, they're going to be repeated. So that, it's really basic swooshes. And that, from there, it's like, you're building this simple set to like these really complicated music mixers. I've designed sound effects and written a lot of music for slot games. So I've designed products ranging from kids' educational games to casino games, kind of like weirdly divergent worlds. The casino games broadened my musical style range for sure. I had to be adaptable. I have to be able to write music in many different genres. So one day I might be writing like a samba track for a game with like fruit reel cymbals. And the next day I'm writing something that's like for a Breaking Bad game or Ghostbusters. So casino sounds are interesting actually to me because they function primarily as enticement. They are, everything on a casino floor is tuned to work together. Every sound in a slot game is designed to keep players engaged. It's hypnotic. You have to grab a hold of them sort of, in this musical way and keep them in there. It's amazing. So I got to learn what makes players lean into a game, how to create suspense and rises in energy, how to create tension, and how to pause before a big moment. That taught me a lot. And it, at the same time, I was also doing some side gigs that were Unity games that were outside of the casino world. It becomes possible and normal at this time to create these huge mobile games with Unity. So as I was working on these slot games at IDT, I started learning how to integrate my own sounds in Unity. So for these games, I not only handled the sound design work and musical composition, I also might write the sound manager in Unity if they don't have a dedicated sound engineer, build components myself that does things like shuffle an array of sound effects or something, because there's not an engineer available to do that. And so it's almost like quicker, and I have more control if I can just, do that part of the code myself and, do it in a way that is usable for the engineering team so that I can, so that they're not spending so much time with me integrating my end of things. So the game you see here is Fort Stars for Android and iOS. It's a combination of a TCG and a tower defense game where you build a fort of rooms and each room does a particular type of damage, and your opponent wave moves over through your fort to the throne room to conquer the castle. And in this process, as I was hacking into Unity, basically, I started realizing that I wanted to do a little code writing too, so it just gave me control, and that it can be tricky to do that in a team of game engineers with actual CS degrees, but you did just jump in and do stuff and make mistakes, and you learn so much. So this game I was contracted to do their sound design and I had access to the game's repo, and I had familiarity with Perforce and GitHub, and because of IGT and EA, and that gave me the freedom and the confidence too to create my own check-ins and pull requests, and then because I always knew that we could all back out of them if something didn't work, and I could just build on them. Other Unity projects. This is Siege Hammer. It's a Vive and Oculus desktop game. It's a VR tower defense game. There's some themes in here. I ended up doing a lot of card games and tower defense games on different platforms. World War Bots too. That was a bunch of ex-Sims and Maxis people worked on. We worked on that. Build giant robots and pulverize cities with them. So in these games, I was actually, setting sound emitters on 3D art objects in a virtual space, launching the game, hearing them move around the world with the game objects, and this was really exciting to me because it was so similar to what I've been doing with sound all along. Since art school in my undergrad program, I was situating speakers in 3D spaces and creating 3D music compositions you could move through. So this is still at IGT, doing a bunch of web games, casino games, and I was gaining more momentum programming sound and behaviors. So I started working with JavaScript more, and that was what our code base was in. It was all JavaScript. And we designed our own, this happened a lot, we designed our own web audio engine from scratch, because there wasn't a thing, there wasn't any web audio libraries at the time. It was just put together what you can with Sound.js, and usually one of the engineers is just making it from scratch. So that meant, an audio player along with a lightweight tool set that the sound designers could use to program sounds, and this gets integrated in all of the games. So when you're designing the engine, you work closely with the engineering team to build all the features you want in your sound engine. You start, really thinking about basic behaviors, like do you want polyphony, do you want music to be interruptible, do you want to be able to have fades, do you want control over the lengths of these fades, and when they happen, all of these problems could be broken down into really simple features. How many hooks do you need for sound effects? Should they select from an array of sounds on each play? How do you want that to work? Do we need to invent some sort of round robin behavior so that samples don't interrupt each other? And how many channels are available? And what is that going to do to, the processing of the game? Is it going to slow it down at all? How many can you get away with? How much can you put in and get away with? I think it's always what it came down to with these web games. Whoops, that went off a little bit early. Sorry about that. I was going to talk about actually what it is first. So all of these things, with the engineer that you're working with is most of the time going to be a generalist for a lot of these things. It's rare to have a dedicated sound programmer on the game engineering team. It's considered a luxury unless you're working for a pretty big company. So if you like startups or interesting projects that don't have an extreme amount of funding, more and more your sound designer has to also be working on the engineering side of things too. So at IGT, though, IGT is kind of the Microsoft of slot machines. They have a lot of LAN games in Reno and Vegas. That's where most of it, the money comes from for them. So, we did have a budget. So we're looking at adding middleware, audio middleware for the first time. This is like 2015 or so for these slot machine games, because there's a ton of music switches to program, and they were really complicated music games with a lot of different tracks and a lot of different logic. My team was making web versions of some of these slot games, and so we needed some middleware that had a JavaScript version. So this ruled out Ys and Fmod right away, because at the time, those are built for consoles and their core languages were C++. There wasn't a JavaScript library. They didn't have web versions of their middleware. So, but Crowdstar did. Crowdstar was popular in mostly more in Japan than it is here. I think that is still true. The problem was that no one in the company was familiar with this stuff. So to be able to persuade our engineering team that it was safe to integrate, I had to get the company to buy off on using middleware. I realized I had to vet it. So not just use the authoring tool, but actually like trigger sounds with it on a web page, build a working web page with it that used the binary, like all the cue sets and everything that you create with the middleware, and see how they behaved. And so that's what I built. I wanted to use it like an engineer would be doing, you know, when they were assigned to a game and putting our middleware, our cues in. So as I vetted it, I built this tool, and I wanted my proof of concept to also serve another purpose, a web page that sound designers could use, could put all the sound design and their cues in that web page, and test all the sound cues we were making. So before they actually integrate it into a game. So the audio cues, you give each of those, the page gives each of the sound cues a clickable button when you load the page, so that we could know how the different cues interact with each other before they go in the game. So it ended up serving our team of sound designers well. They could test things out before handing off to a client engineer for hookup, and it was a handy proof of concept to test beat synced audio in web games, which is something our studio had never done before. I'll play the screen capture of it so we can see a little bit of what it does. As I click on the buttons, you'll see the block number change. And a block is just a looping segment of music, or a couple layers of segments of music. And then they sort of modularly will like move on to the next block depending on what I've told, whether or not I've told it to move ahead or not. So sometimes you'll see the block number will switch without me actually clicking on a button in here, and that means I've sequenced a cue to auto follow to another one. So let's see, this might be kind of hard to see from here, but and it's really goofy music too. It's just like proof of concept music. I needed something that you could really like pick out when the changes are happening. So you can see when I hit that button, it didn't go right away. It waited until the downbeat of the next measure to be able to play. So, you know, if you picture some action happening in a game, even though you want the feedback to be like, to happen pretty close to the event, you still want it to be musical enough to be able to wait until there's actually a musical beat. So it does do that. I think there we go. So that just moved ahead to another block. And then I have some sound effects that I played over it just to test. So if you can imagine, like, you know, our other sound designers are making their game music and their audio and their sound effects, and they're putting them in these binary files, and then this website points to that file and makes all of these cues, loads them up in the page. So that's like just demoing that, yeah, the sound effects work on top of the music. And then I'm checking for polyphony, making sure that nothing gets cut off. And then this one, you know, that's literally just a bunch of notes in a sequence and checking the sequencer to make sure that it's playing things in order instead of random. You know, there were different random random settings, or you can sequence up or down, just like maps. I don't know that I started it again. Okay, so I realized while I was at IGT, I really like to do this stuff. So it wasn't enough to just hand off content anymore. I wanted to take a look at the structure of sound engines, understand them, and see what I could get them to do that was on the edge of what was available, and go further. So the 3D Canvas in Unity and the audio programming eventually led me to jump from IGT to Spatial in Emeryville, where I started contributing to a team that was building a tool set that let you program all of your audio in a 3D canvas as a standalone desktop app. That's what you're looking at here. Build your little nature interactive music scene while you're inside a representation of your speaker map. So this team, okay, so this is a tool set that let you program all of your audio on the 3D canvas as a desktop app here. It's like Unity, but just for sound. It was really cool. It was like, here's a whole, game engine basically, but just for programming sound. So this is Spatial Studio, where you create your scene, and once you're done creating it, you sort of package it up like an app, like an audio scene. It just has all the behaviors, and it has the audio, packs them up, and then sends them to another, like a host computer. And you can connect to that host computer with your phone, and there's a playlist of the different scenes that are available, and you can play any kind of like biophilic or like music scene you want, and then it'll play them out a multi-channel speaker array that you set up, and it's kind of any speaker array that you set up, it can accommodate. You just have to make sure the speaker map is like where you make sure your speaker map is pretty accurate, and it'll do all of the positioning for you. So at this company, I was designing scenes and building proofs of concepts for a few different tracks that the company was interested in. Health and wellness was one of them, so like PTSD treatment, graded exposure to loud or triggering sounds, experiments with meditation, biophilic sound masking in offices and restaurants, things like that. Immersive events too, like we had an Everest exhibit that we did for National Geographic, and we also partnered with Meow Wolf for a South by Southwest, and they did the music, and we spatialized their exhibit. I'll show you that later. It has built-in Lua scripting, so a lot of times I'd be creating scripts for features that we wanted to build into the UI in this, but we didn't have that yet in the UI, so it was a proof of concept again in sort of a script for, like, we needed a script that would randomly pick a sound from an array of sounds. It's like a really basic thing. We didn't have the UI for that yet. One that would track a position from a camera and plug that into a sound object's position in the scene. So I had a bit of JavaScript from IGT, which made it easier to learn Lua for spatial. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that script is it's a random object picker, so it'll pick one of the sounds in an array and play it at the beginning of the object's life. The objects are each those little like diamond shapes in the middle of the screen, in the middle of the canvas. So this is how I landed at my current approach to sound design in the area of interest. By designing, you start wanting to program sound behaviors, which leads to more interesting design possibilities, which leads to more programming, and before you know it, you're sort of beyond the DAW and wanting to get impatient. You get impatient with the DAW, like a linear thing, So you want to create new tools that do out-of-the-box things, and you kind of acquire those skills over time to be able to do that, and hopefully get paid for them at some point. Even native Unity now, if you're not using middleware in Unity, it doesn't have a shuffler. The first thing I want to do when I make footsteps or whatever it is shuffle through randomly shuffle through variations, and you have to write a script to do that. And in Unity right away, it's not like built into the audio source. The audio source is a one-to-one sound to audio source relationship. You have to make another component to do that. So, poor game audio, it's neglected in some ways still. So you hear the picker cycle in this video too. I pitch shifted some crickets so that a set of them are tuned. They're dropped in pitch quite a few octaves that are turned into like this pentatonic scale. So I think there are 8 or 9 different ones at different pitches, and they're time stretched too, so you get this nice slowed down feeling. And then I just let the picker play a few layers of them every once in a while, and then stop, and then like a minute or 2 minutes later it plays again. So like over time, it's just there's a little bit of up and down range as far as what's playing and what's not, and just kind of blending in with the nature stuff. So let's see see if you can catch it, because I know might be kind of low. When I was trying it earlier, it was. There we go. So there's little chimes and things in the background. Here come the crickets. So there are sound files that are like maybe 3 seconds long or something. And it's just picking them and playing them in order, in like a random. It just grabs one out of like 9 or 10. Oh, and that's okay. That's it for this video. This is a little shorter than I thought it was going to be. Okay, yeah. So, and that's it's hard to tell there because the whole system is in there, and I don't have anything visually soloed. So, but the cricket group is like one of the blue ones in there, and then it has this like. The cool thing you can do in this is like you have one like parent object, and then it works in this hierarchical system. So you can have 5 children of that one parent object, and then place them around the room that way. And then when you want to move them around, you can sort of pick up the parent object and move that one around. So and then everything kind of goes with it. So it's it's handy. Yeah, so I got to, geek out on this new way of spatializing stuff for a while. So how did I get from here to here, spatializing audio and deploying the sound scene for this Meow Wolf exhibit at South by Southwest? That's mysterious to me as well sometimes. I'm just going to start, okay, go back to Leapfrog for a little bit. I got lucky, I think is the answer. When I was at Mills as a grad student, Jeannie Parson was a game music composer that was hired at Leapfrog, just got hired to build out their audio department. And they were a startup, so initially, who did they hire? They hired a bunch of newly graduated electronic music students. Were we experts? No. We were talented, but we were new. It was about finding a lot of relatively cheap help to edit and process a lot of audio. So, but this ended up being, this is where I learned about game design documents, production pipelines, how to work with artists and animators, how to present sketches to a team, how to take direction, how to direct voice talent, all of that stuff. I think of Leapfrog as my foundation for that. In 2003, we designed the first Leapster, which looked like this. This is my battle-worn prototype unit. The cartridges for this were only 8 megs total. So, and it had a Flash engine ported onto it. So the Flash engine would play a whole game designed in Flash and ActionScript. So we got about a third of that room allocated for audio. The rest of it was animations in the game engine. So there wasn't a lot. We were packing a lot of audio into this tiny little thing. Yeah, we talk about constraints. So I think Leapster's technical constraints made me a better designer for the rest of my career. I think I learned how to push the boundaries of what is available. Design constraints were actually fun. They led to a unified aesthetic, and we only had so many MIDI instruments to design with that would fit in these games, so you had to be really creative about what you could do with the material. The UI sounds, like all of those, forward, backward, confirm, all that stuff. It was on a tiny amount of ROM inside the device instead of on the cartridge. Voice prompts were often without any visual accompaniment at all. They were highly concatenated to save space. So we'd have these recording sessions. Well, the sentence, find the green circle would be it was constructed programmatically out of 3 different sound files. So record one, we had this whole inflection system. So you record one beginning sentence inflection, find that would have the right inflection to fit with everything. So for a whole series of directives from a character, you would start with this one beginning of sentence thing, and then just chuck it together programmatically with the rest of the sentence. Constraints of 4 meg cartridges for the entire game. The 8K sample rate meant we had to craft EQ profiles for each one of our voice talents so they're not harsh or abrasive or on these tiny speakers inside the device. It was a lot of fine, hand tuning and lots of iterating to make them sound good, good-ish, as good as they could be. So with these constraints in mind, one of my first systems design was when we had to design a default set that would serve as the iconic Leapster sounds. So for preschool age kids, we wanted something gentle, but with kids that were a few years older, the feedback from test groups was that the older kids react strongly to things they perceive as too young for them. And this is supposed to appeal to a wide range, so this is supposed to be K through 5th grade. So my directive was to figure out how to strike the right balance of gentle and sophisticated, sort of, and appealing to as wide of an age range as possible, while still sort of communicating the idea behind the sound. There was a lot of discussion of the tone of the UI sound effects around the office, and in particular, the wrong answer sound. We're trying to create a sound that the players may hear a lot, but it would be a tolerable signal, making the experience pleasant overall, even though the initial news was bad. How do we communicate bad news in a way that keeps them coming back and doesn't discourage them? Innocuous enough, but you still get the message. So I was asked to design a wrong answer sound that would communicate that idea. So I created it to match the bubbly, upbeat palette used to design the rest of the default UI. And along with the wrong answer sound, I knew we were going to correct with the voice narrator in a positive, encouraging tone after the sound triggered, which sort of helped temper the sound. So I decided I'd let my wrong answer sound be informed by video games I loved as a kid. I knew this generation of kids and the parents that buy these kids these games would have already experienced sounds from these games themselves. So I decided to borrow the idea of this sort of electronic atonal cluster from Super Mario's Shrink Power Down, that one. I don't know if everybody still knows that one, right? Yeah, okay.
So we wanted to let them know something mildly bad had happened, not totally bad, just a little bit bad. So for this arcade title, it's a take on a game of Snake for kids ages pre-K and up. So the music in the background could be fairly active and busy because, especially on the slowest speed, you're just waiting and waiting for the caterpillar to make it over to the next letter. So there's like, it's long and it's slow. It's for kindergartners, you know. So I'll play this so you can hear the wrong answer sound in context. I think,
keep going.
so yeah, most of it is the background music.
G.
That's the right answer.
I.
There it is.
A.
That controller, that pad is so sticky because it's just been hit so many times. Eventually it'll get there. Come on.
N.
Oh, yeah, okay. That's the right answer.
Pan.
Do I hit another wrong one? Okay, yeah. Well, you heard the wrong answer once. Don't need to do that again. Yeah, so pretty upbeat, brief, descends in pitch, but isn't too sad. The octave is, the interval is an octave. So it's not too dissonant. You know, when you when you hate doing the obvious, sometimes there's a reason. You have to think about the musical language and the commonest of terms when you're doing UI stuff. You have to simplify the language. Sometimes it's the same in writing a melody. Write a good melody, that's really simple, right? Like, I mean, it's the hardest thing because it's so simple. You have to create the audio equivalent of like a traffic light. It's like red is stop, you know, and green is go, and those things just work. So like major is happy, minor is sad, and sometimes you just do that trope, you do that thing and it works, and then you get the originality into the treatment of the sound palette or textures and other ways. So this is how I moved from company to company for a while, because I solved this problem with one of the Leapfrog engineers. We just worked on this together. An engineer moved to a different company and they needed sound design. I would get these contracts. So like it just kind of spread out from there. And this programmer, Elia, and I designed a lot of game audio systems at Crowdstar too, at Fifth Column Games. And soon I had a freelance business with multiple clients because of this one job.
Now it's your turn.
Oh yeah, this is just silly, basic MIDI to pitch to XY translation that we figured out how to do in ActionScript in Flash. And it's so basic, you know, but just doing that, just working on that together, like, it just like, you know, it just kicked off a good relationship between me and a colleague that I worked together with at different companies too. So, yeah. Then mobile games happened. So music in the Leapfrog arcade games is busy, pretty busy. But in contrast, Birds, this is Birds. It's a match 3 game for iPhone. Was it like 2013 or 14? It doesn't have any background music, it only has ambience. So the game designer was Justin Cooper, who designed Words with Friends. I don't know if it's like during the Facebook game phase. I don't know if anybody played that in here, but yeah, Words with Friends was out, it was around that time. And so for this, I decided to move all the music to the foreground, making all the game pieces musical, instead of doing background music. So I'll play a short clip of the game so you can hear the musical sound design. Okay. The little bird voices. Okay, so yeah, so mostly little arpeggiated things and little chords. So yeah, pleasant connect sounds that ascend in pitch. So the more pieces you connect, the better it feels. A chorus of little birds singing the award sounds for making each series of connections. And like, I don't know, that seemed full enough where no background music was really needed. So that part worked great. We ran into a different problem though. Because of it, it was a beat the clock game. There was that game mechanic. So the players didn't really see the stopwatch a lot of the time until it was too late. So we decided to try to solve this with sound as much as with some animations on the stopwatch. So it proved pretty useful to have audio cues for those players that were so tuned into the board that they missed the visuals here. So like once you hear time running out, you know you've only got a few seconds. So if you hear, time's up sound, you know you're done. Let me see if I can play. So that's the time running out. It's a pretty basic. And then time's up. Once you hear the liquid, like the meter fill sound, you know you're safe without really having to look there at the meter. So that's it, the meter filling up. I was really proud of all these bird sounds because they were created with synth. There's no recording of birds in there. They're all little synth chirps that I just hand built in Logic with one of the synths in Logic. Let me play that. I'm gonna play the meter fill sound again. So I took advantage of the tried and true established idea that ascending pitch indicates a value is increasing, right? Which in most cases it's a good thing. I suggest a substance filling a container too by making the pitch components sound a bit liquid. And to create a sound like that, I have to visualize a physical action, right? In this case, pouring a substance, time, into a container, which is the meter, and then adding something, another layer that's like a 3-layer thing, I guess. It sounds simpler than it is, maybe. As I added, the tick-tock sound that it reinforces the idea of time, and then add a little bit more, a little reference of the birds in there, that I think there's one chirp element in there too. Yeah, here it is in context. Yeah. So when I, create sounds like these, I have to remind myself not to fight known sonic tropes, iconography, I guess, because of the fear of cliches. You use ascending pitch, you use the dynamic envelope of natural sounds, but with a more abstract palette. Ascending pitch works in the case of tiered wind sounds as well. This is for all kinds of games. So again, the obvious thing works. The bigger the wind, the more notes and voices you hear, the more harmonically rich they get. So, that's just a low-level good. Excellent. Amazing. Yeah, so the whole range. Yeah. So the voices don't have to sync to anything in here. It's implied that there is the voices of the birds without, a visual of actually seeing them sing or anything. So yeah, while this very 2D mobile game sound design was going on, we're programming the Tape Fest. A friend of mine on the Tape Fest steering committee with me is also a Mills grad. He works at Meta now. He worked on Spore at Maxis in 2008, and I saw his presentation on the Spore music engine while I was working on Sim Animals at EA in Redwood City. And Sim Animals, it was fun, but it was such an assembly line sort of process. It wasn't really one of my favorite things to work. I love designing the animal sounds, but we had an asset manager at the time that would actually be the one delivering all this stuff. So you just kind of go off and you do this assembly line sort of work and then hand it back off. And it was so removed from the programming process that it wasn't really that it was enjoyable, but like in a different way, in just a content way. So anyway, he was talking there at Maxis about how he hand-built an interactive music system using PD for Spore, and PD actually is ported onto the game, and he worked with Brian Eno to get some really lovely, spacey, ephemeral, composed material for the creature builder music. And the result is in that game that the creature builder phase, whenever you plug in another arm or leg or change a feature of it, another pretty texture comes in. It's never exactly the same every single time, and it's kind of magic for me to see that at the time and see what they used to make that happen and see that it was PD. It's a PD patch. This kept coming up for me too, to make giant music mixers whenever I could fit them in, using whatever tech the project was using to make music layers that ramped in when there is a level change or some positive or negative event happen in the game. After doing little ones in Flash at Leapfrog, and again at EA when I worked on Sims Carnival, building example games for a web game building portal. It's kind of like Congregate was for Flash games at the time, but with tools you could use, templates that you could make your own web games. So yeah, I met another game designer that also worked at Maxis. This was actually through that same Tape Fest connection, and got to work on Earth Primer with him. And this was the first iPad game that I made, that I designed sound for. So it's this interactive earth science book, and it lets you explore natural phenomena like tectonic plates and erosion. It's on iOS and Mac desktop. I don't know. I haven't checked to see if it actually runs anymore. It might be too old. Yeah, this is Chaim Gengeld's project. He was the single developer working on this. So I created all the UI for this game, the confirm and tap, and all the interactive earth, lava, water, and wind elements. I didn't write the music. They had a separate composer. I had to work with that and around that. So that's a thing that you do. If you're doing sound design, there's a composer you're working with. Make sure all of your sound palette fits in with the music, and that's its own project. It's a challenge. I knew I needed to design a sort of grand realism with this, as if the Grand Canyon were kind of a sandbox, So I'll play a screen capture so you can hear how when you follow the contours of the Earth's surface with your fingers, layers of sound are mixed in to create the sense that you're not really moving sand or rock, or you're really moving sand, and rock and water around the surface. And the UI sounds like the chime you hear when you complete the exploration task are tonal, but they sit above the music in a way that doesn't compete with it. Anyway, you guys, I'm gonna stop this. You get the idea, right? Oh, oops. I wanted to talk about that for a second. It's, the problem, as I saw it, was to make the players' manipulations of matter feel magical, but still follow the rules of gravity and physics, because that's what this interactive storybook was supposed to be teaching. So yeah, the goal was to maintain close connection to realistic gravity, mass, and weight so the sound feels real world while emphasizing the power of moving whole layers of earth around. There are keys to doing this. You embed the confirmed sounds carefully around the interaction, the chimes that indicate you have played in the sandbox long enough to move to the next sediment layer, for example, so that you give players feedback that they're moving layers correctly while not distracting them from the task at hand. It should feel like a pleasant bump, and that's it. Key to making the interaction reflect the physics of the world was to carefully tune the fade durations when the user lifts their finger from the layers. So particularly what happens once the touch input has stopped. There are long layers of texture, so we're not spawning any, like individual sounds or particles or anything like that. It's just building a mixer, again, that fades layers in and out. So too long of a fade and it sounds like the wrong substance being pulled down by the wrong amount of gravity, so the wrong mass and the wrong weight of tumbling grains. So we kind of know unconsciously that sand doesn't sound or feel or fall like that. We've internalized how we should hear it. So if it's too long or too short, it feels like something's off in the world, in the gravity. So fine-tuning that was a thing. And then after, getting to a point where the sound feels natural, I add slightly more lower frequencies than what you might hear in the real world to give each texture more weight, just to slightly exaggerate the feeling of power and make you feel the real scale of the world. Yeah, so I'm noticing I'm hitting the 1 o'clock. I have a few more things. I'll go through kind of quickly here. So, as far as content goes, this is the project that made me, the Keim Gingold's book was the project that made me realize I loved combining the world of biophilia, so, meditative nature sounds with ambient procedural music. So as I went, from EA to Crowdstar to a company called Mind Control Software, where I worked on the Pokemon, the TCG, and Magic the Gathering Online. Then IGT, I started looking for side projects that would get me closer to something that was more satisfying content-wise. So the bridge, actually, over to spatial, it turned out to be the coding experience, not anything to do with the game content that I was working on. Because I was going to be prototyping in Lua, and I had JavaScript background to be able to adapt kind of easily. And because of the multi-channel audio diffusion I was doing outside of work for Tape Fest, I could speak the language. So when Spatial was doing something experimental and looking for people that were used to installing speaker arrays and designing sound for more than stereo, I had a combination of skills that was right on the edge of content design and scripting. And I had experience working with audio in a 3D canvas. Yeah, and this is just one of my favorite Meow spatial projects. This was the Meow Wolf setup. This picture is during setup. We had like 48 hours to put this all together for the exhibit. This one's kind of, there's a lot of details in this one. Should I keep going, or is it time for Q&A? Should I go? Okay, I was for 5 minutes. Okay, so yeah, so there are speakers all over this room. It was a huge tent. There were 6 islands. Each of these islands, you see one of them in the corner there with the city. They were each designed by different Meow Wolf visual artists. The theme was the ebb and flow of ideas in this murky soup of creativity, and they called it Islands in the Stream. So, once again, we made a giant mixer, but with spatialized elements. So the composer at Meow Wolf, Ben Wright, and I programmed 10 to 15 stems per island in here, and each island is a different color there, and each one of the diamond shapes is a stem that's just looping. It's like looping, most of them are muted. at their initial state. And then so there'd be like this base set of 6 or 7 stems, and then there's this eddy object, which is like the eddy in the stream. That's the blue, the light blue, the path, and the 3 diamond shapes there at the bottom there that are, or at the side of the room there, I should say. This is like a aerial view of the room. When it was over a particular island, so it drifts around the room like that, the other stems would come in then. So the whole thing was beat sync, so we could send OSC to the light board and pulse the lights in time when the eddy was over the island. And I'll play you a bit of the studio session where we set this up. You can kind of see the speakers, and the light's it's kind of dim, but you can see the speakers around the edge of the room there, and those were all like, behind or right behind the tent walls there. So those were where the actual speaker layout was in the tent. So the other colors, are the sounds over the different islands, and the eddies. We had a lot of had subs in the ceiling too, and a lot of speakers in the ceiling and on the floor. So it's the eddies on a path that travels around the room at different speeds, and you could just hand draw that path. So Ben, he had percussion and bass stems coming in when the eddy was over an island. It's kind of a messy mix, I think, because I have studio configured to smash everything to stereo, so it's so that I can present this, without being plugged into the whole speaker array. So you'll kind of get the idea, though. And here I am hitting play in the scene. This is its initial state. This is kind of what's always going on when the eddy is not above an island, and you can see the eddy move over to an island, and then I can't. That's as far up as it goes. This was, if you were standing over there by that island, it was all really loud. And and it just left, and the sound, everything, a lot of things dropped out, it's headed over to another one. And this little lounge music comes in. You got to wait for it. So it would just do this over the course of the whole event, and I think the whole path was like an hour or 2 long or so, and it's just so messy and curvy. You can never really tell without actually looking at it like this whether or not it was totally random. Always normalize your audio when you're going to be doing a presentation, I guess. I guess I'm just going to stop there. I can talk about more studio scenes, but you guys have seen it, so I learned a little Python to do some interactive stuff, so for stereo cameras and motion sensors and touch capacitive controllers, and we'd hook those into scenes and talk to spatial with OSC, and get data from the outside world coming in that would change your sounds, and it was all kinds of fun. So, yeah. Yeah.
Definitely have time for some questions.
Yeah. Hi.
When in your progression did you realize that you wanted to make your own sounds, that, you know, the sounds that were available were not enough?
Yeah, I think it was always like, I always considered them to be my own sounds, I guess. Like I would take, you know, whenever I was taking stuff from a sound effects library or something, I'd take them into Logic or whatever and manipulate them and then record layers on top of them or whatever. And I was sort of, because of that process, thought of them as my own, I guess. I just wanted more control over the way that they were programmed, you know. It was like what to do with them after that, you know. And then, yeah, so I think it's probably even at Leapfrog, really, you know, that I was like, I wanted to be in on the programming side, and definitely at EA too, when that was like just so removed. I was just, you know, like making sound effects and kind of dropping them into the ether. And then somebody else was doing what I thought of as like, you know, half the work. So yeah, it was like, I don't know, 2009 or 10 or so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for presenting your progress and everything that you've worked on. But I have a question about the Q tester, since that was in like web browser. Is that available like online that we could play around with and see the beat matching stuff?
You can, yeah, actually on my website I have that, but it's not available for, you know what I should do is put it on GitHub. I do not have that, but you also need you need the Cryware binary to be able to mess with it and run it. But yeah, you know what? It's down right now, but I think I can put it back and make it work.
Cool, yeah,
it was like that. I was hosting it at one point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What programming languages for getting started if you're looking to take inputs for something and put them into MIDI outputs?
Into MIDI outputs? I mean, I guess I started with Max, which is technically, it is a programming language, but for that, a lot of those things that if you're looking at building your own like controllers and things, those are like usually Python things. You know, they come with a Python library. So like, I think that would probably be a good one, you know. If you're working in Unity, it's like, that's Objective-C, and it has built-in, like, it'll just open your scripts up in your, whatever your IDE is, and then you can learn how to build the sound manager or something, and if you want to do that in Unity. It depends on what you want to do. I mean, I think JavaScript was good for me because it's easier, it's forgiving, and it's versatile, and you can do a lot of web audio stuff with it.
Thank you.
Did you ever feel like you didn't know what you were doing?
Oh my gosh, so many times, all the time, still, yeah. You always feel like that. You're never gonna not. There's always something going on, especially, you know, now. I feel like I run into this thing all the time where it's like, oh, okay, today I'm gonna crack the surface and, you know, learn about this JavaScript library or whatever, and then I learn the thing and I realize that that's like 1/10 of what I still have to do to be like fluent, you know. So yeah, it's always an ongoing process, and I've totally cheated before and gone like, oh yeah, I know how to do this. And you know, just to get going, and then you just, you know, hit the books and start learning it, and you have a reason to. So it's just a matter of self-trust, you know, that you're gonna pull through and get it, you know, get it together. But a lot of times, you know, with companies and everything, they're looking for somebody that wants to look up stuff and research stuff for them and do the work. You know, they don't have to be experts at it. They just have to be willing to learn about it. So, yeah, all the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you know when you're done?
Oh, I'm not. I don't do done. It's totally hard. I find like the only time I'm done is when I run out of time and I have to hand something off. otherwise, I can always walk away and come back to it and find something else to do to it. I start working really deeply with like iterations of it. And then I have different versions of it, like especially with like touch designer stuff. I'm not ever done with those patches, and with Max, I'm not ever done. There's always another little UI feature I want or something, and it's that's very rarely am I done with anything. Yeah, I could go back and revisit published albums that I have and go back in and do things that are totally different. So yeah, that's really hard. So I try to call it, it's done for this purpose, and that's it,
It seems like a lot of people who I've talked to that work in games were like very enthusiastic about playing games themselves. So I'm curious if you grew up as like a person who played a lot of video games.
I played a lot, but certain kinds. I like Super Mario. I don't like any of the like Call of Duty like first-person shooter shit that's out there right now. Like I never really. I don't like. I have like a like. I just don't like. I don't like working in that world. It's really. It's really boring to work on gun sounds or like motors, So, but I always played like, and I like the weirder things. Like I mean, like Katamari Damacy was a big one for me. Like I loved that weird, Okami was another one. Just things that are really pretty to look at. I liked, and I was Super Mario player, and the earliest you could play that, I was playing that. So
do you feel like it's kind of having that passion for video games in addition to music is kind of a necessity for, because it seems like it's a lot of deadlines and very hard work, obviously. So.
Yeah, and I want to believe they're better at this, but I don't think it's really true. But like there are really hard crunch cycles where you're just expected to work 24/7, and you're just kind of always on call. And then that crunch time will stop, and there will be a lull, and then you'll go back to doing the next one, So you do still have your downtime, and I think I think now, there's a realization that that's happening, and they're trying to be better about it, but yeah, I don't know. I always feel crunch time when I'm working on something like that, so.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I was thinking a couple of things. One was in terms of sound library. So you were talking about, creating certain kinds of sounds and multiple games that have similar sounds. So do you have any advice? There's a lot of folks who are working on building their own sound libraries, ideas around that.
Yeah, I would say go out with a recorder as much as you can. And that's a therapeutic thing for me as well. Like it gets me on the other side of, instead of like, projecting out into the world, just to be the receiver and listen a lot. And it's a really good excuse to be able to just like actively listen to a space. The more original recordings you can contribute to your library, the better. I use a sound effect, that website, a lot to add stuff. It's really high quality stuff. That's been a great one. I've just slowly built up, because when you're doing this commercially, you have to pay for sound libraries that you use. You can't, unless they're your own recordings, you can't get away with grabbing something. Unless, if you manipulate it to a point where it's just unrecognizable, then it's probably okay, but like the practice is just not to risk that. So like I, slowly accumulate, from a sound effect. I have like old, libraries from CDs, like Sound Ideas. There was a Sound Ideas set, that was like everywhere for a while. And like, it's funny because I can like if I'm watching TV or something and one of those baby cries comes on, I'm like, oh yeah, that's CD, number 123 or whatever. You can, you recognize those. So you don't want to use those, because they're just out there and they're all over the place. So yeah, I would say, go out with your recorder. I love to go out with my Zoom, what is it called? It's like a first order Amazonic one, the 3VR, I think is the name of it. Yeah, it's a little handheld one. Put that, tuck it under some like rocks or something on the bay and just like, make these really cool, like, surroundy recordings of water, and then you just have those. You can pull from them for lots of different stuff.
And the other question I was thinking about was, how do you think differently for mixing in surround immersive sound as opposed to stereo? Or how do you approach that?
Yeah, it's so, like, people think of like these ambisonic multi-channel recordings, that they're linear and they go on for a really long time, but like to make these environments, you're building like all these procedural behaviors. So what you need to do is fire off, 20 or 30 different varieties of mono sounds. So actually I break out everything to mono a lot, and I don't handle these, these huge multi-channel files in like Studio, because it doesn't serve anything. First of all, if you put a multi-channel file, it doesn't automatically distribute all of the channels to different objects around the space, so it's just better to start with mono ones that you can position. Like a lot of times I'll do, if I have a stereo recording of a beach or something, I'll just break it into mono left and right and then situate one object that's left and one that's right in the 3D space. And then I might, if it sounds good, and this is all just like intuition, there's no science behind putting this in, and then I'll just, if I want something that use the same recording for the other side of the room, I might flip the stereo so that it's like, left and then right, so that, if you're walking to that part, because there's no, like in this world that I am in at Spatial, there's not one listener position, right? Which is different from games, because usually in games you just have one, your head is right here, everything's coming at you from one place, right? But this, when you're in, a 3D environment that's a real room, you want dimension everywhere. So if you're walking there, you're hearing a different set of sounds, or at least a different image, than you would be over here. So yeah, it's tricky. You tend to instead of thinking linearly in long files, you're thinking about really short iterative files that when they're all playing stacked on top of each other will make something that's like a more granular, more modular thing that just always kind of has a lot of variety and yeah. Are you guys you mostly music tech or music majors? I actually don't know if or performance majors. There are performance majors in here. Cool. Yeah. I use a lot of software instruments. That's what because I'm a piano person, so I just use a keyboard and software instruments. So one thing if I'm doing game music, then I'll do layers of software instruments, and then I might play something live in, or get a friend that a guitar player or something to play something on top of that. So it's usually a combination of both. So you can use it, whatever it is.
Well, thank you again for coming and joining us. And if
Yeah.
you guys have any questions, I'm sure you can come up afterwards.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.